Welcome into Road Dog Live. This is Casey Phillips, and I am hanging out in Orlando, Florida, 65 degrees. We are at the NATSO Connect 2024, and I'm very happy to be joined by Tiffany Newman and Darren Schulte, both with NATSO. Tiffany, great to have you. How you doing?
Good. Thank you for having me today.
When I think about coming to Florida, I don't think about working. You guys are working in Orlando.
Absolutely.
Who set this whole thing up?
So every year, NATSO has its annual conference. We bring together our members, and we bring together our suppliers, and everybody comes for education and networking. And it's just a really great opportunity, and our members love getting together to talk about their common issues.
That's fantastic. And they get a chance to get out of the cold reaches of the U.S.
Absolutely.
And are people coming from all over the world, or is it just North America?
They come from all over the U.S., and every year we try to kind of meet them in a new spot. Next year in 2025, we're going to be in Vegas, so might be a little bit warmer than Florida.
All right. Well, I hope so. And maybe the arms will be coming down. Some chips will be won. People will be having a good time. We'll see. Taking the show. Darren Schulte hanging out with us. Darren, when I heard your name, I was like, I've interviewed that guy years ago in PA.
It's true. I was taller, had longer hair, and I was a lot thinner back then.
Well, I tell you, it's great to see you again.
Great to see you as well.
And now that I was talking to Tiffany, I remember your card. It was NATSO, and we were talking about what was going on back then, and we're talking about a lot of the same things that we got going on today, and that's how can we make the travel plazas, the truck stops better for drivers.
Well, certainly. Casey, what would you like to speak about? You want to speak about some food trends? So would that be of interest?
Well, hey, we can do it. You look like a guy that knows food.
You know, looking at me, I do not miss many meals.
Yeah, well, so we talk to a lot of drivers week in and week out. We talk about travel centers. We talk about the options on the road, fuel, which we'll get into a little bit about truck parking with Tiffany. So talk to folks about what it is that you do and what your area of focus is with NATSO.
Sure. Specifically, I manage the membership for NATSO. So I'm in charge of retention and recruiting for Travel Plaza, Travel Center, truck stop operators. That's my primary focus. However, I end up spending anywhere from the low end 25 weeks to 40 weeks a year in the field with our members, trying to help them improve their performance over the locations, whatever it may be, profitability, might be merchandising issues, it might be marketing issues, or whatever it may be. Anything we can do to assist them to improve their business.
You ever talk about getting drivers to not park on the fuel island?
Well, that is a challenge at times for members, but believe it or not, most professional drivers really understand the impact when they park on the fuel islands, right? I'm sure all your drivers, your listeners will tell you that they run into that problem, but professional drivers understand that. That's why we call them professional drivers. When he or she pulls up to that fueling lane, they really try to make that process as quickly as possible, and the professional ones will get back in the truck, pull forward one full length, and then go inside and try to knock out that stuff, because they understand if you're like 2 or 3 deep, that's not a 15-minute process, right? You might be 30 minutes, 40 minutes waiting in line to try to get fuel. So again, professional drivers understand that. That's a sisterhood, a brotherhood, and they'll move forward. The smart ones will. And I don't mean, when I say smart, I mean smart understanding the impact of the time that it takes to fuel.
Sure, aware.
Aware is a better word.
Yeah,
aware is a much, much better word.
Well, and I think there's a lot of people that go through life with blinders on, especially in trucking. You have that 14-hour clock, it's ticking away, and you're not thinking about anybody else because you know what you got to do. The only time you're thinking about your clock, I guess, is when you're 3 deep behind people that are parking on the fuel island.
That's correct. Yeah, the aware statement is a much better use of the word. It's being really aware of how you can positively impact your sister or your brother who's behind you.
Right. With regard to trends, what would you say are the top 3 trends that you talk about these days?
Well, certainly food is really high up there, and that's because the changes in the demographics that are driving vehicles, as well as the changes in terms of length of haul and things like that, that has kind of changed the makeup of a travel center. So if you, 30 years ago when I started in the business, full-service restaurants were the things to have. Grab and go and QSRs, quick service restaurants, were kind of secondary. Now you fast forward 30 years, and for a lot of our drivers, they don't have the time to go into a full-service restaurant, as an example. They just don't have the time, and so they're looking for lots of food opportunities that cover a lot of different types of food opportunities, whether it be vegetarian, maybe it's gluten-free, maybe they're diabetic or whatever it might
Sure.
be. So they're looking for a lot of different food options that, again, 30 years ago, we didn't really necessarily have that kind of, it wasn't that that concern didn't exist, but the driver really preferred at that time a full service restaurant, and it made sense. But again, if you don't have long haul drivers, and we have many truck stops out there that don't have a lot of long haul drivers, they have short haulers or day drivers, day haulers, whatever it might be, and that's going to change the type of food that that customer is looking for.
Now, with the reach that NATSO has, do you have an opportunity to steer your member organizations towards certain vendors that would be able to impact the food choices per se?
Traditionally, we do not. So as a
Okay.
nonprofit, we kind of stay away from making that decision for the members. So our goal is to notify the member of all the different options out there. So if there is a particular vendor, as an example, that does quick servant restaurants really well, we'll be sharing like, hey, these are your vendor opportunities in this space, especially if they're new to our space and don't understand, like maybe they had a convenience store and it was their own proprietary food program. So they don't know anything about a Subway, or they don't know anything about a Wendy's. They don't know anything about, certain things that are stronger in our space. We'll make those kind of introductions, but it's up to the operator for he or she to make that decision. What we do guide them on and give them help is making sure they understand who their demographic is. As I reference, if you're at a port, for example, and you build a travel center, you're going to have what's called day drivers, right? They're going in and out of the port as often as they can, pulling as many sea trains as they can, and that type of customer is going to definitely be different than a truck stop that's located in the middle of Kansas, for example.
Right, got you. Yeah, really interesting, and I'm glad that somebody's thinking about it, because a lot of people who are impacted by it may not know that there are people working every day on how can we make this better for the operators that are using these locations.
That's right. Right, wrong, or indifferent, truck stops do care an incredible amount about the professional driver. They really do. It's easy to do the easy things, right? But the easy things don't necessarily mean they're the right thing for the drivers. And our customers take the harder road. They're really trying to find out.
Sure.
Again, in certain areas, we have a lot more vegetarian drivers for whatever reason. And you'll see in those truck stops, as an example, maybe more vegetarian offerings than you would at another particular truck stop. And it's not that the truck stop that doesn't offer vegetarian doesn't care about that driver, but they're trying to say, what can I do that's serving the vast majority of my customers who are shopping with me?
Got you. What about some other trends?
So that's one trend as we're talking about is food. It's really, again, something to keep an eye on because a lot of exciting stuff happening there. Another trend would be in the area of how we're focusing on new travel centers that are being built. And what I mean specifically is there's a lot more competition in this space. So how we lay out our stores, how we design them, making it easy to get in, easy to get out, how we line up our parking. Do we do backside parking? Do we do pull-through parking? All of the types of things that are important to a professional driver, operators are thinking about that. And sometimes it may not seem that when they pull up, but believe it or not, they're trying to work with the local communities, the locals, to try to put the best type of product they can. So again, a truck takes a lot more to turn than a car. And truck stops think about that. How easy is it for you to rotate through the property?
Right.
How is it easy to park? Can I make sure that you don't get in a truck accident by parking into someone? Sophisticated operators are making sure their parking spaces are wider, giving a little bit more space and so forth. So those types of trends, again, while were always going on, they're really in the mind of folks that are building travel centers now.
Tiffany said one of the stories you like to tell at parties is all about the best angles to park at. Is that true?
That is true. So I'm a huge fan of angled parking and a huge fan of pull-through parking. It takes up a little bit more space. You can't quite park as many trucks when you do that, but I'm a huge fan of those.
Fantastic. Well, so parking is an issue, obviously, and Tiffany, I know this is in your wheelhouse.
Yeah.
And so for the listeners of Road Dog Live, we talk about the issues in the travel centers a lot. We talk about speed limits in parking. We talk about parking availability. There seems to be in certain pockets of the U.S., as you know, a real issue with capacity. So we don't have a lot of time in this block. Why don't you just introduce yourself and talk about NATSO and how you guys have brought this together and what you do with NATSO. And after the break, we'll get into that talk about parking.
Sure. So I've been at NATSO for 15 years. I work in public affairs, and so I really generally operate in that space where I am helping our advocacy team and to communicate their messages and to generate awareness about what we are advocating for on behalf of our members.
And parking is, I'm really looking forward to talking with you, find out what's going on, because we have seen that a lot of states are trying at the state level to make some good changes, and we've seen some good changes. But at the federal level, I think a lot of listeners want to know what's happening. We are hanging out in Orlando, Florida, and it is a great day to be here hanging out with Tiffany Newman and Darren Schulte, and we'll be right back. We are back at NATSO Connect 2024, hanging out in Orlando, Florida, balmy 65 degrees, and talking a little bit about what's happening with the truck stop organizations, NATSO Connect. You guys got to check it out. NATSOconnect.com, I'm guessing?
Yes.
NATSOconnect.com. Tiffany Newman hanging out with us. Let's talk a little bit about truck parking.
Sure.
This is one that has been going on, I guess since around 2009. Jason Rivenberg was unfortunately the victim of a crime that happened because he couldn't find good parking. All of a sudden, the trucking industry is up in arms. We need to solve this problem. And it seems like there's been some push and pull in the truck parking, but you spend a lot of your time talking and dealing with the legislative side of parking. Can you share with listeners what is happening with that?
Sure. So at the federal level, there has never really been a carve-out of funds that were specific to truck parking. As a general rule, every state receives what are called formula funds, and they are appropriated from under the infrastructure bill, and states put those toward all of their highway projects, and they can choose to put those toward truck parking or not to, but there's never been a special carve out. And so a few years ago, Congressman Mike Bost introduced legislation called the Truck Parking Safety Improvement Act, and that bill would allocate $755 million for truck parking. And that bill has been passed out of the T&I committee on the House side. There was a companion bill introduced on the Senate side, but that has not yet gone before a committee. So NATSO supports the Truck Parking Safety Improvement Act because part of what it would do is prioritize truck parking grants that state departments of transportation coordinate with the private sector. Our industry supplies 90% of the truck parking. We have the real estate, we have the amenities that truck drivers want. So we really feel like the best use of those dollars, the way to maximize those dollars, would be for states to partner with us. But that legislation, I have to be honest with you, it still has a long way to go.
Sure. Well, and I know once legislation is passed, too, once you do have the funds available, then there's this other problem. How do you best utilize the funds? Does NATSO help states to utilize the funds more effectively?
If there were a carve-out and it was grant dollars, then the states themselves would have to go through kind of an RFP process.
Okay.
They would have to submit a formal proposal. That proposal would have to be accepted. Then they would go back and they would probably put out what's called an RFI. And under an RFI, then they, reach out for information from industry. Who's interested in partnering and how would we work together? What would it look like? And then there's a very formal process for all of it, for the receiving of the grant and then the disbursement of money under a grant.
Okay. So you made the comment that you have the property. What does that mean?
I mean, the NATSO and our members, we already provide 90% of the truck parking that's out there.
Okay.
We already have land that is connected to amenities. We're not.
Oh, got you.
If we can find the right ways to partner, right, then we're just adding to existing facilities.
Right.
Right. And so it makes it faster. It makes it more efficient. It makes it less expensive. Now, there are challenges that we definitely experience at the local level. Something that a lot of folks don't necessarily always realize is our biggest opposition to expanding or even to building a new truck stop actually comes at the local level, either from a zoning problem,
NIMBY.
or from
Not in my
communities
backyard,
that
yeah.
do not want us. There have been truck stops that I have talked with extensively where they have spent years and years and years trying to build out a property, and they have pushed it as far as they can, and then
Yep.
they've had to walk away because the community just rejected it so hard at that city council level.
Darren, you have some more on that?
Yeah, an example, Tiffany's spot on. There's been examples where a truck stop has been approved, and the city has said something like, well, we're concerned about crime, or we're concerned about this or this, but we're happy to have you have a truck stop, but you can't have any lights in the parking lot because we don't want the lights bothering the community.
Yeah.
So when you think about that, you state you don't want all these things, and the truck stop is willing to put up bright lights to make sure there's secure, well-lit parking, and then the community comes back and says, but you can't have bright lights. That's what often the operators are faced with.
That's a problem. Obviously, you have a disconnect between what the trucking community, which hauls 75+% of freight tonnage,
Correct.
what they need, and what communities use, and what community will allow, and that's within their rights, obviously.
And the communities will be very vocal and very aggressive about it. I can think of a location in Maryland where it ultimately came down to opposition from 5 people in the community, and that site didn't ultimately move forward. I can think of a location out in the Midwest where there was a truck stop that was very much needed, and the community just really came out saying the most outrageous things about truck stops and truck drivers, and me. So they will get very, very aggressive when they don't want it.
Yeah, well, it's amazing. Just as an aside, I was talking to Robin Hutchison of the FMCSA, and the first thing she said to me was, I get the nastiest comments from people. And I'm thinking, well, it's not really you. It's the position that you hold. It's that there's a lot of frustration, regardless of what side of any issue you're on. It's like a referee in sports. Anytime the whistle blows, they're pissing half of the crowd off, right? So it's the same thing with anything that affects so many people because of the sheer numbers in trucking.
But I would like to say, too, that like over the course of my career, I can tell you that I've also seen tremendous change at that city council level.
Good.
Right? Like I get more calls from city councils who are saying, how do I address this concern about idling is one that comes up all the time. And once we educate them about, that trucks don't just idle for absolutely no reason, they idle when they have to, and we walk them through that, then we can kind of get to a good place. And I do feel like that is happening more, and I have more of those calls.
That's wonderful. Let me ask you another question. Just I'm a thinking outside the box kind of guy. So I know that there are a lot of state scales that are shut down. There's infrastructure that exists up and down the interstates that have not been developed, and I know that it's probably not under the purview of NATSO. But is that a direction that your organization would consider, helping states think of other ideas to develop parking?
So our industry has really built up at the interstate exit interchanges.
Okay.
Right? And we think that that is where the businesses belong. That's where those communities have developed. And what a lot of people don't realize is like how much we have invested in those communities, right? And there are towns in America where we represent a very large taxpayer. Our members give to local schools, they give to police departments and fire departments. And so, our position has always been that we support the communities in which we operate, right?
Sure.
Up on the interstate is not, that's not part of that. That belongs to the state.
Gotcha.
The state gets that benefit, and that doesn't make sense to us.
Okay. Well, so 10 years down the road, say that there is a state scale that opens up parking, and now there's a need for a mobile vendor that would be potentially considered a truck stop organization. Are you following what I'm thinking? A development of helping the industry develop the parking that is needed, and then have your member companies come in afterwards and support those spots.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, because I want to be clear here,
Yes.
You're asking me about along the interstate.
Yeah.
And to us, that is actually a competitive position that
Okay.
would deter us from
Gotcha.
implementing parking.
Okay.
Right? So if you come onto the interstate and you're a business,
Mm-hmm.
and if you were to have the ability to put in food or fuel or other commercial offerings that were going to compete with our sector, we would have no incentive
Gotcha.
to build the locations nearby that can provide the parking. And
Understood.
so what you're
Yeah.
doing then is kind of having the opposite effect.
Right. I'm with you. For your current members. For current members that are the Loves, the TAs, but if there was another member that could be born of this roadside that's a new travel stop, that's not an interchange, I'm just thinking 20
Right.
years, 30 years down the road.
Well, it's prohibited by federal law.
Is it?
So
Okay. Well, there you go. Well, that's all you had to say. You're breaking the rules.
you are breaking the rules, Casey.
All right. Well, we're going to jump out of the way for a quick timeout. When we come back, more from Tiffany Newman and Darren Schulte from NATSO Connect 2024 in Orlando, Florida. I'm Casey Phillips. We'll be right back. We are back at NATSO Connect 2024. Tiffany Newman hanging out with us, Vice President of Governmental Affairs. Is that right?
Public affairs.
Public Affairs. Well, you handle the government too, right? The government listens. Public Affairs.
Got a promotion.
Yeah. And Darren Schulte is Vice
Over the
President of
break.
Membership. Membership is right? Okay.
nailed
I
it.
got 1 out of 2, 50%. That's about like my grades in college. So let's get a little bit deeper. So during the break, we were talking about what I could have asked and what you wanted to say, talking about the parking issues and my idea of developing some roadside type parking capacity, and then developing the truck stop organization around that. But that is in direct competition with your member companies. And you, during the break, likened this to the travel plazas along toll roads, thanks to Darren's help. So talk to me with that filter on it. What do you want to say?
So when you are traveling along the interstate, the service plaza is operated by the state, and their goal is to get you in and to get you out as quickly as possible and to turn over their spaces. And that is directly the opposite of what a truck driver needs. You need to be able to come in, you need to be able to park, you need
Yes.
to be able to stay, you need the amenities, and that's just not the business model that they operate under at all. At the same time, our locations really have their relationships with the bank. They've invested in the real estate that they already have, and they have done that with the goal of putting in all of those amenities. So to the extent that there was going to be a location on the interstate, it's not an incentive for them to go and invest and build out what the drivers need.
Right.
And therefore it will just have the opposite effect and drive the amenities and the parking away.
Got you. Darren, would you like to add anything to that?
No, I think that's spot on. I mean, essentially, as Tiffany said, you're going to have the polar opposite effect on what you're trying to accomplish. Again, if the states would work in conjunction already with the private community and the people that have invested at times tens of millions of dollars, it's not just a million or two. Some of these truck stop properties are upwards of $20 million. They've made those huge investments on those interchanges and those exits. That's where real change and positive, what I'm going to call positive impact on parking issues will take place.
Sticking with the idea of trends, I'm interested in the number of pay parking spaces versus free parking spaces. Do you see as a trend in member organizations total removal of free parking? I don't know what it looks like today, but can you give me a little light on that?
Yeah, I don't think you're going to see a trend to paid parking for customers. I'm going to be very clear about paid parking for customers. I don't think you're going to see a trend for that. I think you might see some trends in certain areas for paid parking for non-customers.
Okay.
Right? And a lot of the drivers, for example, that I've spoken to over the years are actually happy that in some cases where a operator will put in paid parking for non-customers. They'll say, hey, Darren, I love coming to this truck stop, and I used to get so frustrated. I would show up and there were no parking spaces for me. And I know that these guys are not fueling here or spending money or something like that. And they're actually being very, very positive about that. So I think you will see a trend for non-customers having to pay for parking, but you won't see that across the United States. So, for example, there are some areas where we never have any kind of like quote-unquote parking issues. Maybe, just going to throw this out, maybe like in the middle of Nebraska, as an example, on a warm, sunny day, there won't be any parking space issues. So for that customer to then go ahead and put in paid parking of any type, I think would be a bad business decision, and I don't think you'll see that happen. In some other areas, again, maybe at ports or where there's congestions, there's a shortage or something like that that's been artificially created, I think you'll have some paid parking growth. But again, I want to emphasize, I don't think it's just going to be paid parking. I think it'll be paid parking for non-customers, because travel centers and truck stops want to take care of that. Like if I was to walk you through the thought process that most truck stop operators take when it comes to creating parking, angled versus, again, a pull-through, backups, right? There I go again, right? Like one entrance, one exit, one way to, not circumvent, but to go through the circulation to cut down on accidents and things like that. A lot of the sophisticated operators, think about stuff like that. So that costs money, right? To do that, to put the lights, to make it safe, to put security, to move the snow. So again, I think they want to do that for their customers, and that's what I would emphasize. I think you'll see a trend for, again, paid parking, but for non-customers.
Got you.
Makes sense? We go downtown, like, for example, downtown Orlando, we want to park our car. If we're not going to spend any money downtown, we won't be able to get our ticket validated. If we go spend money in the mall or the register, often it's free parking. And I think that is a trend that you'll start to see more of.
I think it's probably the old herding cats analogy, because you have so many different geographic locations with so many different capacity challenges, and you get into middle America, not really a big deal.
Correct.
And so that is where most of your free parking is going to be.
I believe that to be the case, yeah. Because nobody wants to chase off business. These are folks that, again, have invested millions of dollars. They're not trying to upset the professional driver who they adore, right? We are in this business, and we adore that customer. They're trying to take care of him or her. So they're not going to, willfully upset that customer.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I do know that you had mentioned more in the food trends that you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, so I think I cut you short there by not really walking you through some of the different trends that we are seeing. So for example, go back 30 years when we talked about full service restaurants, we were kind of meat and potato types of people, for example, right, wrong, or indifferent. And that's just not the case today. So you will go into places that might bring a sushi chef, believe it or not, on a Wednesday. There's one particular travel center that has that does that, actually brings in a sushi chef on Wednesdays. It happens to be one of their high volume days, and they're selling sushi at the truck stop, fresh cut sushi. I know people like to make fun of gas station sushi. Well, one, we're not gas stations, we're truck stops and travel centers, and our sushi is a heck of a lot better. Yeah. But Indian food, for example, Indian food is really growing. Mediterranean types of food. It's not the what we call it. It's more of the rule now that you will find different types of food offerings throughout truck stops in the United States than it was before. And again, it's not just cheeseburgers and French fries. It's all sorts of different types of foods, whether again it be grab and go or proprietary food programs. And again, even in restaurants where operators are using their full service restaurants as commissaries. So you think about something like that, there's products that a driver, again, he or she doesn't have time to sit down and eat a meal, but because they have a full service restaurant, they're able to move that into more of a grab and go type of offering and so forth. So you're seeing all sorts of different types of food offerings in travel centers.
I hope they never get to oysters on the half shell.
That could be dangerous.
Only in certain months, right?
That's right. That's
Yes.
right. So one of the certainly it's not a trend, but it's a focus for travel centers, and that is when a driver pulls up to fuel, how does the operator make that process faster? So we fully know and understand that the driver has a mandated number of hours that he or she can drive. We're fully aware of that. So if we go back to what I've said earlier about the process of fueling, putting 100 gallons of fuel in a tank is fast. Right, 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 5 minutes maximum. But there's like a 15-minute process. You get out of the truck, you clean your windshields, you throw the trash away, you do all of that stuff. And as we talked about, if you're the second or the third truck in line, you might be talking 30, 40 minutes all of a sudden lost time. So there's a big focus on how do we take that unproductive time and turn it into productive time. So you're beginning to see operators look at things such as how can a truck driver order food? How can she order food while they're fueling?
How about
or
that?
It could be through apps, it could be QR codes. So they are really understanding that the professional driver, he or she doesn't have time. So if we can shave 5 minutes here, 10 minutes there, in terms of an entire year, how many hours can they reclaim getting back to being productive and where they earn their money, right? They don't earn money for sitting there.
Sure.
They earn money driving down the road. So you will begin to see more of those types of rollouts. They're already out there. They're hit and miss kind of right now, but there's a lot of money and a lot of initiatives being spent on how do we make that more productive. They're looking at things such as if a driver is parked in the parking lot overnight, how can we deliver food to their truck? Maybe the driver had a long day and he or she doesn't want to get out of their truck. So how are ways that truck stops can, provide a service to that driver? And I think a lot of it is going to be around food, but I do think you will continue to see other ways, even within the store, such as cashierless checkouts. That might not be something a professional driver that he or she may like. However, the car customers all of a sudden, if a professional driver doesn't have to wait in line to pay for their fuel or do something because there's not 10 car customers in front of them, if they're all using the self-checkout, those are things that, again, I believe will benefit the professional driver, speed up their processes for them.
Technology, it catches up with everybody, right?
Correct.
And I think about going into the local grocer and having 3 or 4 registers that are just all automated.
Correct.
I can scan bananas with the best of them.
That's
now,
correct. That's correct.
You remember some of those codes.
That's correct.
before you
That
know
is
it.
exactly correct.
Well, it's been great to talk with you guys. Anything that you'd like to add, Tiffany? You want to put an invitation out there for anybody who's in Orlando that just wants to come around?
I would love for everybody to just stop by the NATSO Connect show. That would be amazing.
Yeah.
But no, this has been fun, and I would love to come on again and reach out to us anytime. This is
And
super
next
fun.
year is going to be in Vegas, and I expect
Absolutely.
an invitation.
Caesar's Palace.
Viva Las Vegas.
Darren, anything you'd like to add?
No, yes, I always appreciate you having me on. This is my second time, and I do appreciate it very much.
I'm glad to be able to reconnect with you. We are at Orlando, Florida. This is the 2024 NATSO Connect. Tiffany Newman, Vice President of Public Affairs. I get it right that time?
Yes.
All right, and Darren
I
Schulte,
did enjoy my promotion while it lasted.
Vice President of Membership. And we will be back on Road Dog Live.